It's the second coming of the Donald Tusk, with implications well beyond Poland's borders. 2 months after a general election marked by a record turnout comes a comeback for the center-right leader. Tusk's first stint as prime minister was followed up by a move to Brussels, where as president of the European Council, he found himself clashing with the leadership of his own country. Now, after 8 years of the right-wing nationalist Law and Justice Party, we'll ask how different Tusk 2 will be from Tusk 1. With a sitting president who wields veto powers, with peace appointments in the courts and at the central bank, will it be change or political gridlock? Speaking of gridlock, the vote in Poland's parliament coinciding with the lifting, at least for this Monday, of the month-long border blockade of Ukraine's biggest road crossing by Polish truckers and farmers, at least at one crossing point. We'll ask why. Will the change of leadership in Warsaw quell wavering support for Kyiv's war effort and the EU entry permit exemptions that go with it? More broadly, which way for a one-time Soviet bloc nation whose economy has soared since joining the EU in 2004, but whose mostly Catholic electorate remains bitterly divided over culture war issues? Was the tightening of one of the EU's strictest abortion laws the issue that perhaps swung the pendulum away from the Conservatives? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking about the return of Donald Tusk. With us from Warsaw, Marcin Zaborowski, Policy Director of the Future of Security Program at the think tank Globsec. Welcome to the show.
Hello, good to be here.
From Brussels, Dominika Kozic, Europe correspondent for Polish public broadcaster TVP. Good to see you.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Historian Jacques Rupnik is Director of Research Emeritus at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Thanks for joining us. And from Tatariv, that's in western Ukraine, correspondent Gulliver Cragg is there. How are you, Gulliver?
I'm fine, thanks. Good evening.
Your reactions on the hashtag F24debate. Yeah, a day of high drama at the Polish parliament. First, lawmakers voting out the outgoing Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, whose quixotic bid to form the next government was without surprise defeated. Then it was the turn of Donald Tusk to get the needed votes and to speak before the parliament for Polish politics. It's literally a breakout the popcorn moment, with hundreds even filing into a nearby movie theater in Warsaw to watch the drama unfold throughout the day. So, Marcin Zaborowski, a bit of performance art outside of the parliament, and yeah, do you feel like it's a historic day?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, it's a historic day for Poland, but also for Europe at large. I think in my living memory, I don't recall the situation in which a populist government would be outvoted and removed from power through purely democratic means. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is for the first that this is happening. And only until recently it looked unlikely, or at least everybody was expecting a very confused, hanged parliament from this from this election. What we see is a clear victory for the democratic bloc, a clear majority of 248 seats in the parliament of 460, with Law and Justice being reduced to still a large party. And Law and Justice did very well during the election. They have a strong result, but the result still falling well short of majority. So this is happening now in Poland, and it will have consequences for the balance of power in the European Union. It will have consequences for transatlantic relations. It will have consequences for entire Central and Eastern Europe. And I think this is, as such, it is a truly historical moment.
Donald Tusk, who knows both Warsaw and Brussels well, a mainstay of Polish politics for decades. Yinki Oyetade has more.
He's a centrist, pro-European political veteran who's expected to mend Polish ties with Brussels. Donald Tusk first launched into politics as a student activist in the 1980s, joining the Solidarity protest movement against communist rule in his hometown of Gdansk. In 2001, he co-founded the Civic Platform. 6 years later, the party would go on to win elections in 2007, defeating the Law and Justice Party.
Przekonywaliśmy Polaków.
For many weeks, we were convincing Poles that life in Poland may be better, that Poles deserve a good, decent government and a better life.
Że Polacy zasługują na lepsze życie.
For 6 years, Tusk led Poland as prime minister. In the top job, he shunned big projects, focusing instead on raising living standards in the country with the help of EU funds. In 2014, he left for Brussels to become the head of the European Council. The PIS accused Tusk of abandoning Poland to become Germany's puppet in the EU. In Brussels, the former prime minister fought hard to be viewed as a tough leader. During Brexit negotiations, he hit out at British leaders who campaigned for the country's departure from the bloc.
I've been wondering what that special place in hell looks like for those who promoted Brexit without even a sketch of a plan how to carry it safely.
In 2021, Tusk made his political comeback in Poland. In his absence, the right-wing Law and Justice Party grew in popularity, and Tusk was determined to oust his long-standing nemesis. He got his chance during elections in October of this year. The PIS won the vote with over 35%, but a Tusk-led alliance won a clear majority of seats in parliament.
I have been a politician and a sportsman for many years. I have never been so happy in my life with this second place. Poland has won. Democracy has won. We removed them from power.
Following elections, the country's president Andrzej Duda gave the incumbent Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, leader of the PIS, the first chance at forming a government, a move seen as a delaying tactic. What happens next in Poland matters beyond the country's borders, with both the EU and war-torn Ukraine keeping their eyes on Warsaw.
Dominika Kozic, is this the same Donald Tusk that you've covered him obviously for a long time now in both Warsaw and Brussels? Is it the same Donald Tusk and is it the same Poland?
It's a very good question, especially about Donald Tusk. I remember an article in Euractiv a few days after the election in Poland on October, and it was the question mark, is that still Donald Tusk or Donald Trump? And it was reference to campaign in which Donald Tusk has presented his other image than we used to observe. I have the impression that he adopted some of the ideas of law and justice, especially about migration policy, but not only, also about changes in treaties. And it is a little bit new, Donald Tusk, but also Poland has changed during the last 8 years. And initially, when he came back to Poland from Brussels, many people had the impression that people will not support him. And he personally still has lots of lack of confidence when there is some questions about between people. But he is learning, and I think that after a few months of searching, now he understood what Polish people would like to listen, and that's why there is a little bit new Donald Tusk.
So let me put it to you, Gulliver Cragg. It's the victory more of a coalition than of one man. Why? Why did they win?
It's really Donald Tusk's victory. It's his success in bringing these disparate parties together. And really, it wasn't expected. A lot of people were saying he should have given way to somebody younger, perhaps Rafał Trzaskowski, the mayor of Warsaw. He basically bet on himself to be able to at least build enough of a consensus to win the elections between the coalition, which goes from the far left, really, Razem, although they have said that they won't actually take any ministerial posts, they will support the government. They're part of the left-wing bloc called Lewica, all the way to the centre-right. There's sure to be a lot of divisions and difficulties going ahead. But Donald Tusk really can take credit for this comeback, I think. I mean, his charisma and his ability to negotiate and to forge compromises between people is what made the opposition coalition finally be able to have something that the electorate felt it could place its confidence in. I think that he had every right on the election night to say he was the happiest man in the world. I mean, he was really, really the comeback kid.
Jacques Rupnik, people here in France who watch things at a distance thought, well, Poland, it's kind of like Hungary, a populist government in power with more and more of a lock on all the major institutions. There's no way the opposition can win.
Well, it was an uneven race, and indeed, PiS government had all the tools at its disposal. The media control, the public media, number of other tools as well.
So what happened?
Well, powerful mobilization in Polish society, especially young people, the younger generation, mobilization of women who were outraged by the toughening of the abortion law. Number of things like that that brought people to vote. You had 75% participation. It was high participation. So that helped Donald Tusk. The question will be, can he deliver? Because you raise the expectation. Now we're going to do away with PiS legacy. Well, you are now in power, and how do you go about it? You have a president that can block your laws. You have a constitutional court where all the appointees, or most of the appointees, are from PiS, and they can block your law. Incidentally, today, the Polish Constitutional Court voted that the laws of the decisions of the European Court of Justice are invalid, non-valid from its point of view. So that just gives you a hint of the task ahead. And you have the problem with the media. How do you go about turning a PiS-controlled public media into something that should be more pluralistic? How do you do that? You shut it down and bring in new people, or you wait for people gradually to make a change? Basically, this is a dilemma. Either you go for a radical change, an attempt to really break the legacy of PiS, but then people say, but this is really,
just a purge.
This may look like a purge, and or you will be behaving constitutionally, and you will be blocked by the president, by the constitutional court, by the public media that are instead, and you will not deliver. And you will disappoint all those voters that mobilize for you. So this will be a very difficult and narrow path for Donald Tusk and his coalition, which way they will go. Well, it's a tough choice, because whatever they do, there will be people who will be dissatisfied.
Marcin Zaborowski, you heard Jacques Rupnik there lay down two pathways. Which road will Tusk take?
I don't think that the choice is necessarily that dramatic and that clear cut. Let's just remember that Donald Tusk is not the prime minister for the first time. It's his third term as prime minister. He is a very experienced head. He was at the head of the coalition government in the past twice. And he was in Polish politics. He's been in Polish politics since practically in 1989. So he really understands the system. He understands the people. He has a background of both a historian and a sociologist. So he also evolved himself. He used to be quite a liberal-minded, free-marketing politician. And over time, he moved very much to the center, to almost like, I don't want to say social democratic position, but centrist positions in which he recognizes that the strong role of the state is necessary to help out the less advantaged and so on. So we are talking here about a politician.
Because he left a bad taste the last time around with liberal policies that older voters felt like it left them high and dry.
Well, indeed, I mean, there was a lot of controversies about the former Tusk government being too too liberal, too focused on promoting free market ideology and so on. One of the things that policies which he introduced in the past, which was deeply unpopular, was to raise retirement age, something which you are very familiar with in France
Indeed.
itself. But what kind of social protest it can cause? So this is a legacy that Donald Tusk had to cope with himself too. That was a very, very unpopular reform. But in contrast to France, Poland is a country with a very declining demography. So the need in Poland was pretty obvious to do that. In France, it's perhaps a little bit less obvious. So anyway, over the last few years, he has very much shifted to the center. And now in his coalition, he has left and left-wing parties.
So a nation that has shifted away to a degree from free market policies. We also saw, again, Jacques Lupnik mentioned it, a record turnout in October's general election, driven by that record youth vote. Back in 2020, Poland's constitutional tribunal tightened was already a very restrictive abortion law. That prompted massive protests. Was perhaps Dominika Kozic, we focus on the economy a lot, but was that issue the one that perhaps triggered that mass mobilization that won the opposition the election?
If you're asking about abortion,
yes.
I think that it was one of the most important factors in this election because it was massive engagement of young people, especially, and women. And it was, in my opinion, more voting against Morawiecki and Kaczynski than for Tusk. People were voting, especially young people, more against the current government than supporting new government, especially that, as you mentioned, all of you mentioned, it will be a very big coalition from right conservative, like Agriculture Party, till left and liberals. So I think that this question of abortion was one of the crucial moments.
So does that mean that Poland does that mean that conservative Catholic Poland has changed?
And I don't think that Poland has changed a lot, but it was also a question of the presentation of this problem. And people would like to have choice, and it was the idea of opposition, how it was presented. It was offered towards women that if they would like to have right to choose, they shouldn't vote for the law of justice. It was the massive message sending by opposition to young people and to women. Other question is what new government will do with this, because they were promising a lot during campaign, but now, a few days after election, they started to say that it will be maybe not possible to change because of the possible veto from president, but they knew that the president will veto, so why they were promising? I think that they understood that it is it's a very sensitive question and very sensitive problem, so that's why they were talking a lot, so much about this during campaign. Other question is how they will solve this problem, what they will do in reality.
What they will do about it. Gulliver Cragg, viewers watching us in the United States will pick up on the parallel, not just that the leader's first name is Donald, but the fact that this abortion issue is considered the one that lost a lot of votes for the Republicans in midterm elections in the U.S. Would you say that the abortion question was perhaps bigger than we all thought in Poland?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think, and from what I was hearing from people when I was covering the elections in Warsaw in October, was that it's really the question of democracy and the fear that Poland was drifting in an authoritarian direction and could eventually be basically forced towards the exit door of the European Union. The rhetoric from Jarosław Kaczynski, the leader of PiS or PiS, was more and more anti-European. I think Poles are very, very strongly pro-European. They didn't want this conflict with Brussels to continue. They didn't want this authoritarian drift to continue. That's what people were saying to me more than anything else when I was in Warsaw. I think it's also not really correct to say that Poland hasn't changed, because if you look at the statistics on church attendance, it is falling. And there are more and more people who want full liberalization of abortion laws. But contrary what people in the West to what people in the West might think looking at those protests, the people who want really full liberalization are still not the majority in Poland. Most people want some liberalization compared to the very, very strict restrictions that peace put in, but they don't want it to be just like in Western Europe. And there's a real division in Polish society, and that's going to be one of the hardest things for Donald Tusk to negotiate in holding his coalition together, I think.
All right, and we're talking about just how much Poland has changed or not. Jacques Rupnik, you've seen the long arc of Poland.
Yeah, of course, Poland has changed considerably. I mean, has been transformed economically. I mean, Poland's membership in the EU is a tremendous success story.
People said, oh, they weren't ready back in 2004. Now they're what?
Tremendous success story. You look at the figures, I will not inflict any data on you, but it's a tremendous, anybody who has traveled to Poland can see it. You know, so people know that. Now, the debate was about that enormous prosperity of the last quarter of a century was perhaps unevenly distributed. And that's what PiS addressed. Basically, the voters of PiS were the losers, as they were called, the losers of this transition, or at least partially felt that way. And they were mainly in the eastern part of Poland. They were more small town, rural Poland. So you have the two Polands. Big cities vote en masse for Donald Tusk parties. This is not the case in Eastern Poland. So you have the two Polands, you have the culture wars we have just mentioned, including on abortion.
So the way you describe it, it's going to get worse, not better, this division between the two Polands.
Well, it depends how the politics will be played with the new government. I fear, I mean, this is what I try to suggest, that there is this dilemma for the new government, which way they will go about the change. And this is not my making. I mean, somebody suggested that oh no, I mean, he's an experienced politician. Of course, he's a very experienced politician. He's been around for 30 years. He's been president of the European Council. Very experienced politician. But that doesn't do away with the fundamental dilemma. How do you go about dismantling illiberal democracy? We have studied, as political scientists, the transition from authoritarian government to democracy. Well, we have learned this was a great subject of the 1990s. Today, for the first time, we are dealing with something different. It's not authoritarian dictatorship or something like that. It's illiberal democracy. You still have elections, you have a majority in power, and you don't have the separation of powers. You don't have independent public media. How do you go? You don't have an independent constitutional court. How do you go about dismantling the legacy of illiberal democracy? That's a question for Poland today. That will be hopefully one day the question for Hungary. Very difficult question. And this is why Donald Tusk, with all his experience, all his skill, will be needed. But that doesn't do away with the dilemma. Do you confront the legacies in a hard way, which is what some Polish commentators suggest? I mean, constitutional lawyers, Professor Sadurski and others suggest that. You have others who say, no, we should do it a piecemeal way, etc.
Right, let's give a concrete example. Let's give a concrete example. The governor of the central bank, he's appealing for help to Frankfurt. That's because Adam Glapiński is accused by Donald Tusk of violating the Constitution. He lowered interest rates by half a point, a big margin, during the general election campaign. Glapiński, a longtime personal friend of peace leader Jarosław Kaczynski, he was re-elected, or reappointed, if you will, last year to another 6-year term. So there he is appealing to the European Central Bank. And Donald Tusk has clearly said he wants his head. Marcin Zaborowski, does the new Prime Minister of Poland ease off on that threat?
Well, that could be a very tough one, because indeed, I mean, this is referring to what Jacques was alluding to. I mean, it's very difficult to govern on the ticket of moderation and returning to power as a pro-European option, and at the same time use Bolshevik methods of, removing by force or by unconstitutional means people from the institutions appointed by the former government. So that's gonna be this kind of conundrum that this government will have to face with, and it's not gonna be very quick. And unfortunately, in opposition to Law and Justice, they do come across as an option of moderation. And Law and Justice, they didn't have to care about stuff like that. They just changed the whole composition of the Constitutional Court or Supreme Court through unconstitutional means. But the current government, if they want to, if they want to come down in history as guardians of the Constitution, they will have to do it more slowly and in moderation, as I said, and perhaps.
So you're saying don't sack the governor?
I'm not saying don't sack a governor. I'm just saying do it carefully, do it in cooperation with the European Central Bank. Do it in the way which would not rock the boat, because European Central Bank does not like, of course, central bankers to be removed from the position. Clearly, because they are the guardians of the independence of central banking. Clearly, this is an irony of a situation that the deeply politicized central bank in Poland, which was serving the interests of one party, not the country, which irresponsibly cut, interest rate in the midst of very high inflation, now is appealing to the central bank for protection, arguing that its independence is being under assault. And we will see a lot of things like that around, including stuff about the public television that definitely will need to be very, very thoroughly changed, probably actually scrapped down and built from scratch. And on that matter, perhaps you can talk to Dominika, because she works for them right now.
Dominika Kozic?
Yes, I heard since the election, I heard many times that I should pack my luggage and get out from Brussels, but on a much more vulgar way, I heard this from the supporters of new government. But if I may go back to the question of the head of National Bank, Professor Glapiński, we heard also, as like Donald Tusk referred that he might use physical power to remove Glapiński from his current position. I think that it is not fair to use this kind of the arguments. And it was already the reaction of Christine Lagarde, who told that she will try to protect Adam Glapiński. And it was also a sort of opinion of the Court of Justice in Luxembourg that he shouldn't be removed from the position. So it was my just remark. And if I may add something, because I'm afraid that maybe later I will forget what I wanted to say, that we heard many times, also in Poland, but also in the Western media, that in Poland we have such a terrible regime. There is the dictatorship of Kaczynski. And it was a rumor even just before the election that if Law and Justice will not win this election, maybe they will use physical power against the opposition. Maybe they will use even soldiers, army, and we'll see tanks on the Polish streets. As we see, it was no physical power against the new government. It was everything on the peaceful way. So it shows that this narration on the horrible regime in Poland was not completely true.
Jack Rybnik, on that point.
Yeah, well, the alternation in power has been made possible, and this is very reassuring for everybody. And raises hopes for people in Hungary. And of course is watched with great interest in Slovakia, because Slovakia is drifting in an illiberal direction now. So of course to see that illiberal regimes can be overrun by a democratic election is of course a very comforting thought. It's an uneven struggle, as I said. This is some authors call it competitive authoritarianism. You still have political,
or winner takes all democracy.
Yeah, you still have political competition, but you give an unfair advantage to the executive power. Fortunately, the election mobilization can show that alternation in power is possible. What we have to see now is how you dismantle it. And central bank is one case. You mentioned the media. I mean, how do you go about the media? You don't ask our colleague here to be packing from a suitcase from Brussels, but surely you cannot leave things as they were. 240 journalists were dismissed in the first year of peace in power in 2016. This is huge. So are you going to do the same in reverse? No, you will be accused.
Well, that's kind of what happened in France. In 1981, there was a huge purge of public broadcasting.
Well, 1981,
then in 1986, there was a counter purge, and then afterwards it all calmed down.
Yeah, I think that we don't have purges and purges in
public broadcasters. There were a lot of people fired.
Yeah, well, and they were, but that was a long time ago. We are talking about today, and we are talking about Poland.
All right, also happening on the day when it's all happening at the Polish parliament, a local mayor on the Polish side of the biggest land border crossing with Ukraine reportedly lifting a month-long blockade that has been impacting the war effort. Polish truckers, but also farmers furious over an EU waiver for Ukrainian goods coming into the bloc, which they say undercuts competition. The story's a little confusing, Gulliver Cragg, because we don't have actually confirmation that these are orders from above. Was it a local initiative? Was it just one border crossing? What more do we know? And we've been covering this blockade.
I don't know the details of what's been decided or announced today, but everyone was expecting that when Donald Tusk took office, he would be able to negotiate some kind of a resolution to this problem. It is, though, a very real and difficult problem because the Polish truck drivers really are losing out from the Ukrainian competition, as are the Polish farmers. One solution that I've heard proposed is some form of compensation for them with money coming from Brussels. Perhaps we'll soon see Donald Tusk going cap in hand to ask for that kind of solution because the Ukrainians are saying they absolutely can't give in to these Polish truckers' demands. They have to be able to keep crossing more or less freely into the European Union. They deny allegations that they're doing cabotage and transporting goods within the European Union, but it doesn't look like they see much room for compromise. And this is a politically very difficult problem for Donald Tusk. I think that PiS tried to exploit it as much as possible during this interim period while they were still in office, because it's more this poorer Poland we were talking about, more conservative, more inclined to support the right wing. Actually, a lot of them support the far-right Konfederacja party, which, though it had a terrible showing in the elections, has suddenly been sort of riding rather high or gaining a little bit in notoriety and popularity as a result of this dispute with the truckers.
And what about on the side where you are right now in Ukraine? How much has this dispute impacted the war effort?
Well, I think it has impacted the Ukrainian economy and the war effort to some degree. The Polish truck drivers said that they weren't blocking military equipment, but the Ukrainians said, we're not showing you all the military equipment that we're taking. Part of the reason that we wanted this border to be open freely is we want to hide weapons in the trucks. We don't want the Russians to know exactly which way the weapons are going. Also, some of the weapons are in the form of small components for drones and stuff that are actually ordered from commercial suppliers. So it has been impacting supplies in some way. More broadly, I think that this crisis is something that is symptomatic of things to come. If Ukraine manages to hold out against the Russian invasion, if it gets the money and the arms it needs from the US and the war carries on, it doesn't cave in, it wants to be joining the European Union, which means that it wants this whole market to open for it. And it's a bit like the same as what happened to Western European countries when Poland joined. They're going to lose out, the Poles, from Ukrainian competition, which is cheaper, and there's probably going to be all sorts of disputes involved in that.
Yeah, Marcin Zaborowski, we can recall when there was the referendum here in France on joining the Eurozone, complaints about the Polish plumber undercutting wages for domestic workers here in France. It was a bit of a myth. Nonetheless, when you see this border dispute with Ukraine, which way is it going to go as we head towards a third winter of war? At the outset, Poland was such a strong ally for Ukraine.
Well, the 10th, depending which way you look at it. It's not the third.
Oh, the third all-out war, I would say, since I'm thinking about February of 2022. You're correct, Gulliver.
Oh, I suppose February's still winter. If you look at it that way, it's the 3rd. I see. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay. Marcin Zaborowski, how much support for the war in Ukraine today?
Well, the support for the war is still strong. But yes, I mean, a kind of a logic that you just mentioned yourself is also starting to settle in. A kind of a logic whereby some interest groups in Poland are increasingly looking into Ukrainians as a competition. That concerns the farmers, that concerns the truck drivers, that, for example, concerns the entire cleaners market in the country. So, basically, Poles now are waking up to the dynamic which they themselves have caused in a number of Western European states in the past, and are learning how to live with that. Still, when you look into opinion polls, 85% of Poles think that Ukraine needs to be supported, and they would be prepared to personally pay for that. You also see that all the parties of the governing of a coalition which are coming to power right now are strongly in favor of Ukraine's EU membership and in favor of continuing war efforts for Ukraine. However, what we saw during the campaign, it was the situation when the populist Law and Justice Party was competing for anti-Ukrainian electorate with a far-right Confederation Party. Confederation that's, to the right of Marine Le Pen, so it's truly very, very right-wing. They were squarely anti-Ukrainian, and Law and Justice decided, well, maybe we want to compete for some of the people these people might be voting for, and we adopt anti-Ukrainian logic and arguments too. So it was the government of Law and Justice which raised the argument about protecting Polish farmers, and who did absolutely nothing during the 1 month of the blockade of the border, when this border was being blocked with a very long queues stretching by 25 kilometers. They did absolutely nothing to ease this problem.
Dominika Kozic, it's a big EU summit coming up. Before it, we're going to see on Tuesday the Ukrainian president in Washington. Again, it's the question of, do you feel as though that support in Poland is beginning to fade for Ukraine?
I think that most of the Polish citizens still support Ukraine and know very well that Ukraine is defending us as well, because otherwise, with the collapse of Ukraine, we'll face with furious and powerful Russia. But from the other side, I can imagine that many people just feel tired with this, because it's almost 2 years from the beginning of the war in Ukraine. We have more than 1.5 million of Ukrainian refugees in Poland. Polish government is paying for that. And some people, I can understand this, just feel tired with this, just feel unsecure a little bit. And if I may back to Marcin Zaborowski talked about this confederation, this party which has very strongly narration accusing Polish government that they were traitors towards Polish nation, that they didn't represent Polish national interest. It was not only confederation, but also it was, I heard some voices from the Agriculture Party, Conservative Agriculture Party, PSL, which is a member of this new coalition. It is Farmers Party, and also other leaders of Agro-Unia, a new coalition of Donald Tusk, who also accused Polish government that is not enough strong, government of Morawiecki, supporting interests of Polish farmers. So it was not only confederation, but also some agriculture lobby, which are accusing Polish government that it's not enough supporting Polish farmers. But generally, I think that most of the people in Poland still are supporting Ukraine, because we know that it is in our interest.
Gulliver Cragg?
Paying for all these Ukrainian refugees, because prior to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there was a labor shortage in Poland, and these refugees work. They come, they start businesses, not in every sector, because previously there were more Ukrainian men, of course, in Poland, and there's a deficit in the building sector, so it's complicated, the economics of it. But to say that Poland is paying for these refugees is too simplistic. I think that Donald Tusk certainly understands that the refugees can be a plus for the Polish economy. Whether or not the whole Polish electorate does is another matter.
Jack Rybnik, paying for it. One of the first things that Donald Tusk does at that EU summit later this week is he'll be obviously lobbying hard for all that those pandemic funds that have been frozen. How much traction will he get? Will he get his money sooner than later?
Well, I think there's a lot of goodwill in Brussels towards the new government and towards Donald Tusk personally. He was a president of the European Council. I mean, back, Poland is back, so to speak. That is the motto of the day. Now, that doesn't mean that all the problems are easily overcome. These funds that have been blocked because of the violations of the rule of law, if there is a very strong commitment of the new government to show that they are ready to tackle this issue, surely those funds...
So it won't happen right away, is what you're saying?
Yeah, it won't happen right away, but I think there will be, it will be forthcoming, and it will be sooner rather than later. The other question is what we've just discussed. Farmers who want to block Ukrainian grain, lorry drivers who are blocking Ukrainian lorries, fearing unfair competition, etc. We've heard this at the time of the previous enlargement to Eastern Europe. And I remember you referred to the Polish plumber. So yes, on Saturday, we will get the green light to open negotiations with Ukraine. But what we've just been talking about is just a small hint of what is in store when the actual serious negotiations about what it means bringing Ukraine into the EU. And the question will not be whether Spain or Portugal have a problem. No, it will be the countries of Central Europe and particularly Poland who will be most directly affected. It's the end of the agricultural policy of the EU, if you take in Ukraine, given the size and given the discrepancy in the funds. It's the end of the structural funds. Poland, like other Central European countries, have been great beneficiaries of EU funds, about 3% of GDP every year. Well, if Ukraine joins in, these funds will be quite legitimately divested to Ukraine. So suddenly, one thing is to say, on security grounds, we have to do the utmost to support Ukraine. And Poland has been in the forefront of that. And then comes a political question. We have to open negotiations with Ukraine about its joining the EU. And then comes the nitty-gritty, the concrete stuff. What does it mean? And as soon as you do that, you discover that there's a lot of reluctance in society towards that prospect.
This week's summit, the last of 2023, will be much more about the urgency of the immediate when it comes...
The immediate problem will be not Donald Tusk, but the immediate problem will be Viktor Orban, because he has said that he wants to block that opening towards Ukraine. Viktor Orban, well, he was in Buenos Aires yesterday at the inauguration of the new Argentinian president, the new flamboyant. He wants to dismantle, incidentally, the central bank immediately, do away. Not something Poland will imitate. But he had the occasion to meet with Mr. Zelensky, with the Ukrainian president. So hopefully, Viktor Orban would have seen a possibility to overcome his veto.
It's only Monday. It's going to be a busy week. Many thanks for that, Jacques Rybnik. It's going to be a busy week in Brussels. Dominik Kozic, thank you for joining us. I want to thank as well Marcin Zaborowski in Warsaw. Gulliver Cragg, who's joining us from Western Ukraine. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.